This video will walk you through the internal structures of the heart. Again, we start off with looking at the heart in its larger context within the thoracic cavity. Okay, so always remember that we refer to structures according to the patient's right and left, not to your own right and left. Therefore, this is the right side, this is the left side. This is the right side of the heart, this is the left side of the heart. Okay? Deoxygenated blood drains into the heart from the systemic circulation into the right atrium. Now, the right atrium is the chamber itself, so it's this opening where blood is going to be stored for a fraction of a second. Okay. This oval-shaped indentation right here is the fossa ovalis. It is a scar, a leftover structure from a fetal hole in the heart. Okay. This little hole right here is where the coronary sinus drains into the right atrium. So we have blood draining into the right atrium from the coronary sinus, from the superior vena cava, as well as from the inferior vena cava here. Okay, blood is then pumped through this valve right here. Okay, this valve is called a couple different names. First of all, the right atrioventricular valve. So it's on the right side of the heart. It is between the atrium and the ventricle, and it is a valve. It assures one-way flow from the atrium into the ventricle and not in reverse. Okay. This valve is secured to the floor of this triangular chamber right here, the right ventricle, by these little strings. Okay. These are commonly called the heartstrings, but of course in anatomy we give them a more complex name. This is called the chordae tendineae, right? The tendinous cords. And these happen to be secured onto the floor of the heart with these little muscular structures here called the papillary muscles. Okay, so these are the papillary muscles. And normally these heartstrings, or chordae tendineae, would be attached here. Okay. From the right ventricle, blood is pumped up through this second valve right here. This valve leads into the pulmonary trunk, and therefore we call this the pulmonary valve. It is one of two semilunar valves. So it's the pulmonary semilunar valve. Right. Oxygenated blood is going to return back into the heart via these red vessels right here. We can see all four openings here. These vessels are called the right and the left pulmonary veins. And they empty into the left atrium here. Right, the left atrium pumps blood through this flappy structure right here. This is called, again, a couple different names, the left atrioventricular valve, right, between the atrium and the ventricle, the left side. It is also called the bicuspid valve, as opposed to the tricuspid valve, tri on the right, bi on the left, bicuspid valve. And the bicuspid valve also has a third name. It is called the mitral valve. Right, again, chordae tendineae, these little muscles sticking out of the floor of the heart. These are called the papillary muscles. We can see this a little better in the left atrium, or the left ventricle, than we can in the right ventricle. There is kind of like a roughness to the lining of the chamber. This roughness is called the trabeculae carneae, or quite literally the lattice of meat. Okay, if we look at the other half of the heart, right, so this is the superficial side of the heart. If we turn this around and look inside, we can see all of this like lattice of meat in here. Right, so the trabeculae carneae, as opposed to these little pointy parts here, right, these are the papillary muscles, and the cords are the chordae tendineae. Okay, from the left ventricle, blood is pumped up through this valve right here. Note that when you look straight at an internal view of the heart, you can only see the pulmonary valve. In order to see this valve, you have to kind of turn here and look up. This is the aortic valve, or one of two semilunar valves, the aortic semilunar valve. And again, blood is pumped through the aortic valve up into the ascending aorta, aortic arch, and etc. Okay, so let's take a look at another model here. Take off the front wall of the heart. All right, these this is the lattice of meat, the trabeculae carneae. We can see these little muscles right here sticking up. These are the papillary muscles. Again, let's walk right through. This is the right atrium. This little oval indentation here is the fossa ovalis. This is where the blood drains in from the heart muscle itself, the myocardium. This is the coronary sinus. Okay, and down here, inferior vena cava, superior vena cava. Okay. This valve is the right atrioventricular, also called tricuspid valve. Chordae tendineae, again, papillary muscles, trabeculae carneae. Okay. Pulmonary valve, right? It's a pulmonary semilunar valve. Pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries. Red pulmonary veins. Left atrium, left atrioventricular valve, bicuspid valve, mitral valve. Chordae tendineae, papillary muscles, trabeculae carneae. Aortic semilunar valve. Okay. There are a couple more structures that I want to point out on this model. You can see them on all of them, but let's take a look at a couple more structures. All right, the wall in between the right and the left ventricles. This is called the interventricular septum, or literally the septum, the wall, between ventricles. Interventricular septum. Okay, we can also see here that there's actually a couple different layers that make up the wall of the heart, including the interventricular septum. The outermost layer on the surface of the heart is called the pericardium. The squiggly muscle part itself, so this is the actual contractile layer here, the one in the middle. This is the myocardium, myo for muscle. And so all of this squiggly, this is the myocardium. And finally, we can see that there is this smoother layer, and it's actually lining each of the chambers. And we can see there's a line between the darker red squiggly muscle layer and this smoother, more like orangey layer right here. This is called the endocardium. So endocardium, myocardium, pericardium. I also want to point out that the myocardium is much thicker on the right ventricle, or oh my gosh, on the left ventricle, excuse me, than it is on the right ventricle. Okay. All right, final model here. Again, we've seen all of this before. Let's take off the right auricle. Let's take off the anterior wall of the heart. Right atrium. Fossa ovalis. Coronary sinus. This here is the right atrioventricular valve, also called the tricuspid valve. The strings are the chordae tendineae. Papillary muscles sticking up out of the base of the heart. All of this lattice here is the trabeculae carneae. Interventricular septum. Pulmonary semilunar valve. Pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary veins going into the left atrium. Left atrioventricular valve, also called mitral valve, also called bicuspid valve. The strings, right, these strings here, are the chordae tendineae, papillary muscle, trabeculae carneae. All the way up here on the posterior side, right, so this is actually behind the pulmonary valve. This is the aortic semilunar valve. Blood then goes up into the ascending aorta and aortic arch. And that is the internal structures of the heart.